That's new. Okay, so as the voice said, this meeting is being recorded. And let's get into it. So we're going to be talking about a couple of separate pieces from Edean this evening. I'll do it in the order that it was sent to us. So the first one is a short story titled Locked In. And as usual, let's go around and we'll have about a minute each to talk about something that we liked and then something that we'd like to bring up more. So Eli, you're first on my screen. So let's hear from you.
Yes. So I heard I got to see this the first time through, and it was fun to see it again. I found it enjoyable a second time. But what I like the most about it is I thought that the pacing was efficient. Uh, there was a a a fun, like, I guess, like an interesting build to it, that then the switch was a kind of a fun payoff about halfway through, or a little over halfway through. Um, I guess one thing I'd like to discuss more is the connection between kind of like the early first half and that second half, where it seems as though someone else has found the journal. Um, because I do feel like there's a little dissonance between the two, and the first half doesn't quite get the payoff that I really wanted to have in that second half. But I definitely found both sides definitely pulling me through the whole time. So that was good as well.
All right. Thank you, Eli. Brad, you are next.
Right. I enjoyed the story. I think it is an improvement over the first draft that we read back when we did. It seemed to flow better, have a more consistent and pace that pulled me along. I like the concept of this journal that the character's been writing and left out. Is kind of this passive aggressive way for addressing issues with his partner. I don't believe that a piglin would drop 2 ender pearls at once. I don't believe that. And the thing I would talk about other than the ender pearl part is that, and I don't know that this is necessary, but I want to know more about the character's motivations, and I certainly don't know that it's necessary because it's not a typical story arc in this piece. So I don't know that there have to be obstacles or anything like that, but at the same time, I think I would probably appreciate the story more if I knew why, what is it? Is his name Dan? Why he was writing, why he left the journal out, what he's hoping to accomplish, I guess. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Brad. On to you, Ray.
Yeah, so the first piece, my initial impression, I was a bit annoyed by it, all the weird references and stuff like that. But then when it got to the second piece, it kind of came together for me. I thought it was a unique way to show the relationship between Pam and I, or Steve and Eleanor. Both get their side. And so for me, it was pretty obvious what happened there. One of the questions, a change in tone. And definitely 2 very different writing styles that kind of highlighted the 2 different people in the story. So like I said, it's kind of a struggle at the first part, lots of stuff I wanted to nitpick, but then when I got to the second part, I kind of felt like the writing in the first part was intentional, and I thought that was good. So.
All right, thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. Okay, Terry, you are next.
I thought the detail and the language and the atmosphere in the piece in general was very strong. The character was I mean the first person was intense and interesting, and I feel like the treatment of anxiety was very realistic. And I always enjoy when an author can make fiction feel like memoir, and it kind of had that feeling. As the first section went on, it sort of just became more solipsistic, and I began to crave a plot. And so the shift that happened for the second section definitely engaged me or got me back into it, because all of a sudden you had these layers going on. The fact that it was a journal, the fact that the girlfriend was reading it and reacting. And so yeah, it was interesting. I don't have something specific that I would want to talk about right now, but it will probably come up in my mind.
All right, that sounds good. Ian, or good Coop.
Just for clarification, are we responding to Edean's questions or just giving high-level thoughts?
Just those general kind of things, something you like, something you want to talk more about.
Cool. Well, I really enjoyed the story, and I don't know that I'm going to have a whole lot to say about it. I will concur with Terry that I think that it was a great depiction of anxiety and a touch of some depression there that kind of, they go hand in hand. And in this story, they go hand in hand for the character, which I thought was very realistic. Always choosing the path of least resistance. That's anxiety in a nutshell. Also, there was an incredible amount of really rich and vivid detail for both of the narrators as they came through there. And I think that the things that they paid attention to were different enough that it provided separate perspectives. And so that's good. Anytime you switch narrators, especially mid-story, it's good to make them feel like different people. The voice, in terms of things that I may want to come back to, I'm not sure I was sold on the voice being different between those different sections, but that's such like a fine hair to try to split that I would say that like it plays pretty well. So I wouldn't be able to make a specific recommendation for how I could be more persuaded about it. And then I had some logistical questions about like when Steve stopped taking the medicine or if he had stopped taking the medicine, and the relationship that Eleanor has to his mental illness. Something that didn't seem to come up in the Eleanor section was the fact that Steve's got this crippling anxiety that she knows about, at least from Steve's part of the journal. But then like, I don't know, when I got to the end and I saw that like the whole Pam part was a story that Steve was writing in Steve's journal, it made me question the veracity of the entire like preceding portion there. Like maybe Steve is writing a story about a character that has anxiety, but he doesn't actually have it. I don't know. A lot of layers. That's cool. And it gave me a lot to think about. So hopefully we'll have other stuff that we can talk about. But yeah, it was gripping, powerful, and complex enough that it kept me turning the page back to try to piece together the puzzle.
All right, thank you. Nicole.
I'm confused. This is the first piece I've read that I am completely, I mean, I'm really lost. I just don't understand. I was starting to understand the locked in, and then it went to something else, and I was like, okay, I have no clue what I'm reading. I have no clue where I'm going, what's going on here. And I'm really just don't understand. I mean, this is, again, I mean, I've misunderstood other pieces, but I think the ratings, I mean, it's smooth. There are some things that I just don't get the plot. I get nothing of this. This is the first piece I'm just literally confused.
This was the first piece, and it sounds like you were confused. All right, thank you, Nicole. Yeah, we'll go last and say that.
Hey, Jared.
Oh, did I forget Terry?
No, you didn't. But I'd like to take your time if I could. No, I'm just kidding. You might want to mention to Nicole or clarify to her, these were two separate pieces. Locked In was one piece and Parasocial was another piece. It was mentioned in the email. If she didn't
wasn't aware of that, then it's going to lead to confusion.
Yeah, I didn't see that till afterwards. It just, and I thought they might be two separate pieces. It was just, I don't know. I just didn't feel it. I just was having a real hard time with both pieces for some reason. I don't know why, they just weren't clicking with me. It could just be me. Who knows?
Well, everyone's opinion is worth hearing, so I'm sure Dean wants to hear what everyone has to say about it. So I will just say that I really enjoyed the idea of separating for what was it? It was for pain with morphine, the separation between the pain and the emotional part of the pain and the physical part of the pain. I think I'm getting that right. Anyways, whatever that was, that separation, that distinction, I found that very fascinating. And then the applying that to anxiety in the sense of having a panic attack and being totally divorced from the physical sensations of it and the implications of that, I thought it was very interesting. To talk about more is what this particular narrative structure does to that interesting idea, and how that works together, and whether it subverts it at all, or kind of makes it a little less sharp with this idea of coming in with the second part and learning it's all been made up by the narrator and kind of a passive aggressive thing that they're doing. So with that, I will go into the questions unless Edean has something from what we've been talking about that he'd like us to get into first. Edean?
Yeah, actually, Eli brought up a point that I wanted to go over about the first half not paying off, and then Ray brought up something about some annoyances in the first half, and I'd love to hear what those were, those parts.
All right, you heard him, Eli. He wants to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So with the first part not paying off, I was referring mostly to the like first half of the first half, if that makes sense. So not like the murder aspect of it all. More like leading up to that, this just overwhelming anxiety. I felt like that the piece that was like the part of the first half that was acknowledged by the girlfriend or by Pam or Eleanor was that was like the murder part, but I'm curious about the anxiety aspect of everything because it doesn't feel like it shows up in that second part. I guess there's like maybe dishes that are left out and like and like messes that are left, but it doesn't sound quite so overwhelming as I guess it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming as the like author writes, although it is like a narrative piece, so it's not necessarily reflecting that. It kind of feels like it's more true to that than not, if that makes sense. That there is some sort of like therapeutic, lots of anxiety going on in the first half of the first half that I'd be curious to see how it plays in like the real relationship in the real world with Eleanor. Because I feel like that doesn't quite come through, if that makes sense.
It does, and I'm gonna bring in Ian, I think, as well, because Ian, you had mentioned the idea of Eleanor not really bringing up that piece of it and what her relationship was to him taking medication. And so I'd ask Ian, what are your thoughts on the connection of that first part with that anxiety to when Eleanor discovers the journal?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that it's either way beyond my head, or it seems like Eleanor's got other things on her mind. There's a moment where Pam says neurodivergence is serious business, and she's quoted by Steve in the first part there, and that makes me feel like she's being a supportive partner. She's there with him on the journey through this mental illness or through this fear that he's experiencing, and she knows enough about his relationship with his doctors, that she talks about that passive aggressive behavior is something that like his doctor would suggest there. So it seemed like she was, just to echo Eli, it seemed like she was reacting entirely to the grisly murder scene, which is fair. That's the part that I would take the most exception to as well. But she doesn't seem to put it into context. Like one of the things, I don't know, as a person who has anxiety or has had it in the past, I've certainly had partners bring that up during fights, especially in written back and forth fights, that like you're always freaking out over nothing and the sky is always falling and that's just bringing me down and I have to be super positive to counterbalance that. So I don't know, I didn't see Eleanor acknowledging that. But again, it's got such a great framing device that I don't know if the first part is part of Steve's story or part of Steve's life. Like it could be that Steve is seeing a therapist and a telemed doctor for totally other reasons. And that's what Eleanor is referring to when she says that the doctor calls him passive aggressive, and that this anxiety stuff and this dissociative state stuff is kind of like the murderer introspecting on why he would be comfortable with murder later, even if he does.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jared.
No,
is it
go ahead,
okay if
Edean.
I clarify
Yeah,
something?
of course.
Just so that ending is a bit of a placeholder ending that's meant to hold her frustration, but not the dialogue that actually sits at the end of that. So the last sentence that she does say references his anxiety, and it's specifically, she's just talking about how like you think you're trapped alone in your head, but I'm trapped in there with you. You know, I think the specific thing she says is like, the only way out is to go, the only escape, there's only one escape, Steve, and that's out into the world. Watch, I'll show you how it's done. So it's a demonstration of, anyway, not to get into that, but the ending is not, does reference the anxiety. So I totally
I don't
agree
know
with
that that
everything you've
was
said.
included in.
It's not. I gave you guys a copy that doesn't have that in there.
Oh, okay, I see. Yes, because I also wondered that reading the version we had, I assumed that the anxiety wasn't real because of Eleanor's reaction to picking it up. I was like, okay, he must be making it up because otherwise she'd look like such a turd if she was so, kind of looking over it, and kind of being, not really talking about it. But then it was such an engaging depiction of anxiety. I was like, well, this person certainly, like the narrator seems like they're so knowledgeable about it. They must have had experience in it. So that was kind of a dissonance for me that I was a little confused by as well. But it sounds like the ending that you're talking about maybe clarifies that a bit. Let me ask, did people feel that the narrator did suffer from this anxiety, or did they feel that the narrator was just writing a story at that point?
Were you going to bring in Ray?
Yes.
He was part of those two questions.
Yes, please, Ray, come on in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I definitely sympathize with Pam in the story. And so what I got out of it was that Steve had written this story in his journal and left it out for Pam to find, and that it was meant to make her feel guilty for not being a good enough relationship. So Pam wrote a response to his story in which she called out his bullshit. And so the first part annoyed me as I was reading it because I found the references like Minecraft. I play Minecraft, so I get that, but nobody, the average reader probably wouldn't know what a piglin is. And then the references to medications and all these obscure vocabulary and definitions, as well as just the general pretentiousness, especially the part about the woman doctor. And then heavy foreshadowing. Pretty much by the second page, I knew like a murder was going to happen just by how much foreshadowing. So I don't know if this is what you're going for, but I felt like the first part was the writings of a bad writer, which is mentioned by Eleanor later on, that he's waiting to come up with his big idea that's going to make them rich. And so once I got to Eleanor's part, all of a sudden the writing just, I was very much engaged. So I kind of thought that was what was going on with the first part. So it's kind of like once I got through that first part and then got to Pam's, I was like, oh, that's why it was so difficult. And because it's actually a mechanism to show Steve's character as a pretentious, self-pitying, do nothing. So
It all makes a lot of sense. Other people have thoughts on that first part and the payoff, or whether they felt invested in it, or if it felt annoying, to put it in one way. Any thoughts on that? Brad, you look like you're thinking.
I was in fact thinking.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I had anything to say. I think everyone's raised pretty valid points so far. I guess, I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I mean, yeah, yeah, he doesn't, when you read his part of the journal, it's interesting, but it does come across a little bit self-pitying. And, but I mean, I guess I was not as turned off by the first part as, let's say, Ray was as I was reading it. And maybe that's partially because I've already read it once, in an earlier draft. And so I knew basically what the story was about. I guess the thing that I would say is there have been a lot of these discussions about, whether or not, what is the character's actual name?
Steve.
Steve, yeah, all right, Steve. So if Steve, I guess what we don't know is we have no idea how accurate Steve is being, or how much projection he is including in his writing, whether his writing is fair or not. I mean, maybe Steve's a total ass. Maybe he's incredibly hard to live with, and Eleanor is completely fair and being fed up with his bullshit. Or maybe, they're actually going to couples counseling to, discuss their ability to get along and make it work and communicate more effectively. And they're both working really hard, and maybe she's not giving him enough credit for it. I don't know. There's so many unknowns. And so just trying to set all of those aside, I guess I would circle back to what I said in my opening comments, was that, yeah, I found it enjoyable, just the concept enjoyable enough that I would read it as a short story without any significant changes, and think it was probably humorous or interesting, and not have any serious problems with it.
All right. I want to follow up with Nicole. You had mentioned that it was just got pretty confusing. Is there a specific point where it became that way?
Well, I think it just, I mean, it started off like, well, okay, this is moving. And then it just, to me, I don't know. I was just having a hard time just following where he was going with it. Yeah, I guess that was it. It was just, I mean, if you're talking about mental health issues or anxiety or that kind of stuff, it fits with the kind of a theme, because sometimes mental health and anxiety can kind of look sporadic and just those kinds of feels. But it just, the thing that threw me off a little bit was with the, I mean, and I understand that it was a plot twist with the diary and the name twist, but it just, I don't know. It just, I mean, it was interesting in some aspects, and I mean, I don't know. It just didn't, and it could be that, again, I was waiting for more. I don't know. It just, for some reason, I just really had a hard time with these two. I normally don't have such a hard time, and I had a hard time with Dean's piece, and the locked in, and I wish I could explain it better. It could be that there was just a lot of, it was very heady in some aspects. There was a lot of just it almost felt like there was almost like there was this trying so hard. It was it just felt like I'm using these big words, and I mean, again, it just didn't, for me, I just really had a hard time with it again, though. But when you're dealing with like any sort of anxiety or any sort of mental health stuff, a lot of times what happens is it can feel disjointed, and if that's what you're going for, then that works.
All right. Well, thanks, Nicole. Ian, yes.
I just have one more thought about the ending before the track might shift, and that was just that after this partial breakup, or this like threatened breakup, where I just rechecked, and Eleanor does threaten to move out at one point. If I were dating a dude and I threatened to move out, and after threatening to move out because the relationship was already that strained, I found that he had written a story where he butchered my body and like cleaned up the apartment and stuff, I wouldn't be offering any more chances. Like there would be no more like one more time. I would walk. And so I don't know if Eleanor shares that characteristic, or if her like depth of love for Steve is stronger. But I was very shocked at the ending for her to be like, all right, this is your last warning, and then next time I'm really out. Because like, if it were me, I'd be like, that dude's gonna take the next step from fantasizing to acting upon this fantasy if I stick around and give him the opportunity. So that might be personal defensiveness, but that's just something that I wanted to note about the ending, relating back to the beginning part there, that it's in the context of a breakup.
I want to jump on the ending and the beginning and the relationship and character motivations and things like that, because it kind of goes with what Ian was saying. But for Steve, the examination of anxiety to me was almost too good, in that I didn't understand that somebody with the emotional intelligence limited enough to think that leaving this journal around would somehow work in any way would also be somebody who would have such fascinating, compelling, unique insights into their own mind and anxiety and what's happening. So that to me was a bit of a dichotomy where I wondered at that a bit, because it kind of did feel like the person who wrote the first part wouldn't be somebody who would then do the meta, what we find out happened. That to me felt a little disjointed.
Can I jump in?
You jump in, please.
Because everything you and Ian just said is so perfect. Like that, yes, exactly. The idea that anxiety is inherently self-focusing, and you become so myopic in your vision of reality because everything is related to your own personal suffering. Why would it not be? And then the depth of your understanding of yourself, or at least the sources of your anxiety, as you seek ameliorating anything, right? Anything that mollifies, anything that makes it better, makes you especially sensitive and self-aware, and yet selfishly ignorant and obtuse to the needs of the people around you, right? Because everything's getting focused through yourself. So exactly, the guy has an incredible deep understanding of himself that is so juxtaposed so harshly with his passive aggressive bullshit, and the idea that his girlfriend would look at this and see it as laughable is meant to characterize Steve as that ineffectual, as that clearly passive aggressive, as that much of a, I don't want to say fuck up, but kind of a fuck up, right? So, I mean, if the story doesn't show you those things and then prove you're there for a reason, then that's just the story failed for you. But ideally, they're there specifically as characterization pieces, as is the dense references, and again, if it's not meant to be off-putting, I hope it does. You don't hate the guy for it, but it does characterize the character. So everything you guys have said is fantastic. The only thing I guess I'll ask before we move on is, in order, I think, Ray, is it so annoying that you just set it down and you go, I don't give a shit? And then Ian, oh, go ahead, actually, Ray.
No, I wanted to get to the murder scene. So, the police were coming, something was going to happen. So I knew there's going to be some kind of payoff by the end of the story. I just wasn't expecting Pam to be the ending. And once I hit that part, it became very engaging. So no, and also the description of anxiety, mental illness was interesting, but just the way he described it to me made me not like Steve too much. So.
Thank you, Ray. And Ian, is what justified my decisions with? Does that work for you? Like, do you see that? Can you see it as being part of it, or does the story not do enough to show you that it's intentional? Like, do you not trust the author to have put it there purposely?
What's the there?
I muted myself. Sorry. It was about Eleanor seeing Steve as ineffectual and passive aggressive, and thus not taking the threat as a threat, but instead as just another in a potentially long line of passive aggressive behaviors.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that what you set out to do in characterizing those characters as being the one being weak and ineffectual and the other one being kind of headstrong and willing to call someone else on their bullshit is pretty apt. I guess the part where the believability of it broke down for me was leaving a journal someplace as a passive aggressive act without it being like open to a spread or something doesn't seem, I wouldn't think that if I left my journal around that my partner would look at it just because it was there, unless it was like open and unambiguous, like here's a page that is intended for someone to see. So in that sense, I felt like it could have been a little bit more pointed to sell it as a passive aggressive act. And then her not thinking that he would follow through with it. I guess she knows him better than I do. And she may know that like he's not going to do much of anything. But I'd still feel like I was very surprised that he turned out to be a murderer in the first section because of how much anxiety he experienced and how hard anxiety makes it to do anything remotely risky. And murder is a huge risky thing. Like people, anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I mean to say is just that I didn't get the sense that that either he would be so ineffectual that he wouldn't leave the book open so that she could read it, while also not being so hostile that like murder was a real risk. It seems like it needs to go further in one or the other of those directions, and I was kind of stuck in the crosshairs there in the middle where I didn't find him as plausible as I would have hoped. But like, Edean, this is a very minor amount of polish on the varnish to put on this story. Like, I don't mean to say that it wasn't working at all. I just mean to say that like, if it were going to work unimaginably beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's what would help me really be sold on Steve as a character.
Thank you, Ian. Perfect. And then Jared, you had mentioned the character, the discordance between the character self-awareness and his dickish passive aggressiveness against his girlfriend, and in the way that it's explained, or that I explained it, are you similar to Ian? You just need a little more to kind of prove that point?
I think this gets more into opinion and psychology, so I don't know if it's very useful, but I just, to the extent that people have real insights into their own behavior, it usually, like real insights, they aren't, kind of delusional about what's happening and why it's happening. It usually doesn't coincide with the kind of myopic lens and kind of self-centered behavior that if he was saying that like, oh, my anxiety, and then he had some ridiculous rationalization for it that wasn't really tied to what was actually happening and was totally unhinged from reality, then I would think that he would do that. And then I guess my other thing is just that then it seems like the idea is that if someone is anxious, then here's like a general like truth about people who suffer from anxiety. And I don't know that that's necessarily something that is super palatable, ooh, hard to say, to me. But yeah, I think I think it's still, for me, it was just too good. It was the beginning, the insights and the anxiety were so compelling and unique and interesting and intelligent that it did seem to not mesh super well with the last part, but that again is just an opinion, so it's just not super helpful, I don't think, because everyone else is cool with it. So I think ignore that one voice who's saying no. Do you want us to move on to the next piece?
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right, it's 7:38. Let's do it. So the next piece is the first few chapters of, I think of a novel, and parasocial. And Edean, would you like me to go and do the kind of the minute one thing we like, one thing we want to talk about more, or get straight into the questions?
Yeah, the minute thing would be great because that always brings up cool
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay, cool. I'm going to go. The order is going to be reversed. Although, Brad, you've moved around. So, Brad, you're now on the opposite end of things. If you could start for parasocial.
Yeah, I disconnected my internet on purpose so I could do that. You know, I really enjoyed the piece. The other times I've read it, I still enjoy it. I don't. I love the writing. I love the character, the way the character articulates himself when he speaks. Terrence, I love these kind of like romantic thoughts he has, and just the way he describes his affection or Jamie. The only thing I would talk about, I guess, would be, and I'm assuming that this comes out later in the piece, but I don't understand. I want a direct correlation between what seeing his mom's body does to him that makes him this kind of creepy stalker. But then I also know it's so early in the story that probably comes out later. So I'm assuming it's just that we need to read more, but that is one thing that I guess I would say I'm hoping comes out, because it doesn't make any sense to me that witnessing something so horrific would then just make you this kind of weird stalker. But then again, I don't know. I mean, that's just such a who knows how that would affect somebody, but that's it. I'll shut up now.
Thank you for finally shutting up. No, shit. Appreciate it, Brad. Nicole, you are next.
So I think for this one, the language was a little bit, it wasn't so, it flowed a little smoother for me. The language flowed a little bit better in here. I think that was the biggest thing for me. And when I started to figure out and pull a little confusion out that it was two separate pieces, and I again, it was still confusing for me because I had to switch over, and I was thinking it was that, but I wasn't quite sure. And and I went back and looked at the email. I think that it was I mean, it was, I think it's a good piece. It was interesting. It was it was just I guess it was kind of surprised because I read Dean's other pieces and I was curious what time zone it was in, and when it was in 1997, it was kind of like, okay, I don't know, maybe I'm just having an off night. It kind of felt like a murder mystery to me, and maybe that's it, and I liked it. I liked the way this one flowed better with the language for me personally.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. We can dig into that more as we move on. All right. So, not Edean. Ian.
Something I liked, as with the first story, the level of detail is really incredible. I enjoyed the unflinching, seat of the pants, unblinking first person POV where we're like right in Terrence's mind throughout the whole thing. Even when he switches into the third person in chapter 2, I felt like we got even closer into his mind, which is a neat trick, that switching back and forth between first and second person to like really sell the experience of the fear. Really, really solid. The whole thing had a really, well, the whole chapter 2 had a real Lynchian feel to it. It felt like I was watching a David Lynch piece, where like you never know what basement's going to have a cadaver in it. So that was all really, really solid. Like it was very compelling, descriptive terms. 2 notes on incardinine and anfractuous. Those are new words for me. I didn't know those words before this reading, so I like broadening my vocabulary. That was cool. In terms of something that I would want to talk about, the meta comment that I would have is this is the second of 2 stories where the only female character ends up disembodied and dead, or dismembered and dead. And that's an interesting device to use in both stories. But the part that I had the most difficulty with was following Terrence's plan through chapter 1, and to an extent through chapter 3. It wasn't clear what his motivation was. I mean, I know it's to get close to Jamie, but like why the method that he chose was compelling enough for him to get into a position where he'd be on his knees with a gun in his mouth. So it really posed a puzzle for me, and I didn't feel like I had any clearer of a sense of why things went down the way that they did by the end of chapter 3. If anything, I felt like I had even more questions about how the situation would have gotten into this position, why Terrence would have thought it was a good idea to go this route to get at Jamie. So if there's one thing I'd want to come back to, it's about trying to understand Terrence's plan a little bit better than trying to get closer to Jamie.
All right, thank you, Ian. Terry.
I thought the first paragraph was really good. Just kind of blew up in your face, so to speak. There were a lot of great paragraphs in here, especially when Terrence is in the locker. I thought some of that description was very tight and intense and vivid. I didn't, Terrence in the first chapter just gradually became annoying and gross, and I had the repeated sense, or the same sense as I did the last time I read this, of trying to read it to follow it and trying not to read it because I didn't want to know half of what he meant when he was talking, and so I was having to. But the second chapter was much better. It gave a lot of background. It drew me in with the different story elements. Terrence seemed more human, or was more human, and and it redeemed some of his pathology with giving it some background. I think the bit with the mother was confusing, and I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing all the big stuff for me right now because I don't know how much time we have. But do you want me to pull it in there, or?
Let's pull it in there, and we'll keep going, and we'll come back to stuff as we go through.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, so what I liked was the narration of Terrence, definitely the detail and just the rationalization of his actions was very interesting, and just the way that flowed. I really liked the writing a lot. I guess the one part that kind of concerned me, and I wouldn't know unless I read more of the novel, was that it seems like in chapter 2, the backstory is just there. This is who it is, and here's the plot with the agent, and he's stalking random people on the internet. So I fear it might give away too much, but I don't know because obviously it's just the first 3 chapters. So where it goes from here, I'd be interested to see.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Eli.
I'd have to echo most of what I've heard so far. Yes, the writing was absolutely enthralling. I feel like I definitely felt like these, however many, like 18 pages or something, definitely flew by, especially being thrown right into the action as we were, and then followed up with a very intense second chapter. Although part of it is definitely because of the writing. It was very succinct and didn't waste any time, it felt like. But I would have to agree with Ian when thinking about how we got to that situation in the very beginning of Terrence being on his knees with a gun in his mouth, because it seems like he's kind of in the driver's seat for pretty much the whole time. He's able to escape the bungee cords and all that. So did he just let this 20-year-old grab a gun and thing from his sister's car, or kind of like how could that have possibly happened? Again, yeah, this is the beginning of a book, so maybe we would have done that, but just with what we have so far, it doesn't really feel like we're going to necessarily go back to that because he's kind of leaving Jamie behind by the end of chapter 3. So in the meantime, I think it would be nice to just have a little bit better sense of how Terrence got into that situation, because I think we would also know a little bit more about exactly just kind of how Terrence is. Of course, again, yeah, it's the beginning, so there's plenty of time to unfold, but just how he kind of got into that situation, I think will also put a role as to who he is and how he will be the rest of the book.
All right, thank you, Eli. And I will go last and say that, like everyone else, I think everyone else said this, I thought that the voice was super compelling, which I think is one of the biggest achievements in a story, because if you have a compelling voice, people will read and you can get away with a lot of other stuff around it. So I thought that was great. And then something to talk about would be exactly what the plot is going to be. I'm not sure I need to know this early on, and it's gripping anyways, so I'm not sure if that's really an issue. And then it's mentioned that Terrence is scribbling in a like he mentions writing this narrative down, and it made me wonder what exactly the nature of this was. Was he writing a memoir? Is he writing something quickly because he's about to get caught, or what is it? So I felt like I wanted to know a bit more about that, because it would really help me to understand the story and how, because that would dictate the content of what I'm reading. Like, is there an aim to what he's writing? Like, is there a purpose? What's happening? So because that was brought in, because it was mentioned, it definitely kind of made me pause and wonder what was happening.
Okay, let me ask the group, Jared, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You're so accommodating. I really appreciate that, moderator.
Mhm.
But is because Ian had the situation in his last week, and Ray and Terry and Nicole and Eli. Okay, never mind. And nobody was here. But in the situation with Ian last week, there was a fact he was keeping from the audience, and we all agreed that we'd want to know it. So he's writing this story, which he's ultimately planning to give to his next victim, because he wants his victim to understand him. So the whole point of this is to document these dark aspects of himself, so the next person he kind of traps has a better understanding of him, as a means of reaching his ultimate goal. So do you want to know that now? Like, does that help to know that's what's happening? The frame of this is him writing this with the plan to give it to somebody?
I would say, if that's, I mean, Brad's shaking his head. And I would say, if that's the stakes, I mean, it's kind of the same note that at least I think I gave to Ian. But, if that's the stakes to the character, then I would want to understand the character. And I guess I wouldn't understand them, and really, if I'm reading it kind of blind. And then I would say, what is the purpose of withholding it? I guess, is it to kind of surprise the reader at some point? That's a kind of a twist. You know what I mean? Or I guess I don't know the answer to that until I know what the purpose of withholding it is. You know what I mean? But let's leave it open to the rest of everybody else. How does everyone else feel about that question? Brad, I saw you got reacting.
Yeah, I don't need to know it now. I guess I just if there's definitely going to be a payoff later, then I am one of those people that I very much enjoy, in the latter part of the book, having that kind of epiphany, where I realize, something that's been there, and either I hadn't figured it out yet, or there wasn't enough information on the page for me to figure it out. But when I finally oh my gosh, so-and-so is actually, their sister, or something like that. I love those moments. And so if there's some point later in the story where I realize, what Terrence's goal is, that's fine. I don't need to know it now. I just, so long as it's going to be there.
Ian, yes. What do you think?
Well, I was gesturing to where on my screen Ray was, because I didn't want to step on Ray's toes with my own thoughts, because Ray was also unmuting when Brad was unmuting.
All right,
so
Ray, I'm interrupting Ian. Going to Ray. Thank you, Ian.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I just questioned if this is a letter, then who's going to be the narrator after this? Is it going to go to a true third person, or is he going to also be the narrator outside the letter, which can cause some, I don't know, redundancy or just confusion? It might get a little confused. So I'm just curious who the narrator's going to be after this letter's finished.
I can't tell you yet, but there is a plan for that reality.
Oh, I think Edean might have told us this during the submission, but I won't say. All right, yes, and then Ian, you were gonna.
Yeah, I would echo Brad in that I don't think that it's necessary for us to know that greater framework. I would consider it necessary to have more framework for this opening scene, because honestly, it was about 5 or 6 pages, maybe the whole chapter, before I stopped thinking that I was looking at a sexual role play scenario where 2 consenting partners were acting out a scene in a mechanic's garage, and the one starts to wonder if the other one is like going off script or not, or has more like violent tendencies. Maybe I was primed from the first story, I don't know, but I wanted to disclose that that with a little bit more framing at the beginning here, I would have a clearer sense that somebody is in mortal danger and somebody has like an unreciprocated obsession. And I didn't get that sense with my cold reading of it. I thought it was a sex play.
All right, any other thoughts on that framing device? Having it, not having it, does it matter to people? Any other thoughts on that? And I will say that I'm leaning more towards Brad because he persuaded me a bit with the waiting and not knowing. So I'll just mention that. Okay, Edean, any other things you heard that you want to get a bit more into?
Yeah, Ian and Eli mentioned similar things about the story needing more early on to justify how Terrence could have gotten that situation. So I don't think that's that difficult workaround in the sense that, but if there is like, are you asking for, would you want like an entire breakdown of how this happens? Or is it kind of a more oblique, he didn't know there was a gun in the trunk, he was surprised by it, he didn't want to hurt Jamie, and he felt pretty confident Jamie wasn't going to shoot him, so he's happy to just kind of like work through this until he could get to a place where he could take control. Like, do you need to know all that, or does it there's a kind of like casual implication of that act maybe I guess you can't tell until you read it, so maybe this is a dumb question, but go ahead, Ian.
Well, just to speak really quickly on that, because I know that we're short on time and I want to give Eli fair room. The sequence of events, as I understood it, was that Terrence formed an obsession over Jamie, found him at a rave, convinced him that he had done something to his sister, and then Jamie somehow ended up accosting Terrence, bringing him to this mechanic's garage, grabbing the gun and the bungee cords out of his sister's car. And with those pieces in place, it took a lot of work to assemble those pieces and then hold them all in a sequence in my mind. And every single one of those stages raises questions. For instance, the reason that I know that Jamie got the gun out of his sister's car is because Terrence knows that. But if Terrence knows that he got the gun out of his sister's car, then was he like with him? And Jamie was like, let me get something from my sister's car real quick. And if his sister is missing, then why does he have the car? It's just that the way that the information is presented raises questions about the feasibility of the scenario and of that sequence of events, especially with like the military training that he's got. So where my confusion lay was that the sequence that I was able to piece together ultimately raised more questions than it answered, and made me think he shouldn't be in this position. He shouldn't have gotten in this position. And I don't know why this was his plan to effect any kind of goal. If his goal was to get closer to Jamie through a ruse about his sister and to like be in this interrogation mode thing, that just seems like a little, I didn't understand it. I'll let Eli speak more.
That pretty well encapsulates it. Yeah, there just felt there's just a big gap. It kind of feels like in getting from the car to the mechanic's garage. Because in my mind, yeah, it's a similar step of event. It like starts in the rave. Yeah, must show the picture. That somehow gets them to the car, and that somehow gets them into the mechanic's shop. But then knowing all of this background with Terrence of, yes, the military background, and like how he pretty easily overpowers them once there is a confrontation, it makes it seem like the question is like, what kind of person like lets them get themselves into that? And it just doesn't quite feel like there's a believable answer for me. even if he doesn't think that there is real danger there. There's got to be an easier way or something. I don't know. It just kind of feels like there's too many like rather big jumps in like reasoning personally for me to quite follow along.
Any other thoughts along those lines from anybody else about the plan and how it came to fruition and whether it felt like it worked for the character to get into that position?
I never thought of it much when I was reading it, but I think Ian and Eli had valid points, and I don't know that it's impossible for Terrence to be in the position, knowing what I know of Terrence, but considering how active his mind is and how he processes information, it's hard for me to believe that he would have been in this position that he wasn't expecting and not been kind of processing it more. So that's maybe something I would expect, if this is an unexpected situation, if it isn't going according to plan, then I would think he, would be considering that or pondering that somehow as he's working out. Of course, I also know that we don't, him slipping out of the bungee cords is something that, if we knew about as he was doing it, then that kind of ruins the surprise. But that might help or not. I'm not sure.
All right, well, is anyone else beginning to talk? Edean, yes, you just unmuted. Please,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And I hope this doesn't come across as defensive. This is the actual reasoning, and so I'm excited to hear criticisms of it so I can make it tighter. The idea is that Terrence has used force previously. He doesn't like to because of the damage it does to people that he feels a deep, fleeting, and obviously psychotic affection for. And so he's trying to find mechanisms that don't require him to use force, right? To get what he wants out of these people who have no interest in what he wants. And so he uses leverage, and the idea is to use leverage without using violence. He doesn't know there's a gun in the trunk. And so again, as he's kind of fighting this, how do you handle that without violence is the situation that he's in. And he feels in control enough to kind of just let the situation work itself out. Now, that's meant to be implied by his capacity and all the criticisms that I've heard, which are fantastic. You guys have helped me out a lot. But obviously, potentially there needs more work. And clarifying that, I don't think it'd be too much trouble. It just takes text, and I hate using text to do that, right? Because then I can't do the stuff, the fun stuff. So let me ask you this. If that bookkeeping was made, if you're made aware of that bookkeeping, if you're made aware of what I just said, does that potentially do enough to make sense of how the situation came about?
I think people are still a little confused as to the trunk situation, the gun, how they ended up at the car with the sister being missing.
Oh, okay. So yeah, he brings Jamie out to the car to show Jamie the blood in the car as further evidence that the sister's kidnapped. So I can make that clear as well.
Ian, it looked like.
Yeah, I didn't, and this may have been an attentive reading. I didn't get the blood in the car as being a thing. I remember there being a picture, and maybe I interpreted it as a literal. But no, Jamie said that you deleted the picture, so it is a literal picture. So I didn't get the connection that Terrence had brought the sister's car. I thought that Jamie was the one driving the sister's car, if anybody. I was pretty confused about the presence of the sister's car at the rave, if the sister is presumed missing or if there's something presumed to be happening.
There's one line where he mentions how he's going to steal the sister's car and then he's going to take one of her seltzer waters as well, and she only has cherry flavored. Isn't that disgusting? But maybe that's not enough work to kind of clarify that.
I didn't see that line in this submission. And again, it may have been me not noticing it, but cherry flavored seltzer water is a pretty specific image, and I don't recall it. That would help. That would definitely be helpful context. And also knowing that he was the one bringing the sister's car, that would like tie up one of those loose ends for sure. As far as the nonviolent angle, that came through very clearly, especially toward the end of it. But I just got the sense that like when you have an object of obsession, you don't want to hurt it if you can avoid it, because then it's not perfect anymore. So like from a serial killer's mindset, I get that part. And I think that came through in the reading. I'm not a serial killer, by the way. It's just that, writer.
Who's not a serial killer?
Ian, the rest of us are. You got to speak up. Hey, I have to say the business with the mother in the second chapter was really confusing for me, which is kind of disappointing because the way you described her and like within one paragraph is she sounded very heroic, and then she sounded like a drunk who ended up being submerged.
Yeah, so
Like
the bottle in the car plus the car going off the bridge is just meant to be the father's excuse as to what happened to the body. Is obviously he ended up killing her. So again, I'm trying to make the text do a lot of work by implication, and that's not necessarily a good idea for people being able to follow the plot.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, it was confusing and and disappointing because she comes across as the most sympathetic character yet. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, on the one hand she was a hero, then she was a drunk, then she was died in a car accident, then she's in the wall, so it was just kind of
So
a lot.
if you know that, and I'm sorry to rush you, we're at 8 o'clock. I hope I'm not talking over you, Terry. If you knew that the car bottle was a ruse, would that kind of take care of maybe a little bit of that confusion?
The car bottle from
she's not a drunk. That those were planted to provide a false trail for the police to believe of how she died.
I don't know. That would be an awful lot to fit in as sort of a background, which is what you were doing in that paragraph, is just sort of giving a synopsis background, and to have that much complexity and then have her in the wall and make that be the pivotal experience for his psychosis, which is pervasive through the text. It's a little snarled. It's a little snarled right now.
I think it's a bit confusing because we have the narrator telling us from the future, looking back retrospectively, that her death took place, that she drove her car into the river. Like it's said as a fact that he knows in the future looking back. So it gets a little confusing when that is what happened.
Right.
Yeah, I think just saying something like the boys believe that this is what happened is enough to kind of provide some doubt and then strengthen that implication later. But I appreciate Terry's right that trying to do a lot of work with the small amount of text becomes just annoying for everybody involved. So I'll see what I can do about that.
I really liked the description. The description that you gave of her was very stirring. I mean, she sounded like someone you would really want to know. So don't take that part out, but maybe clear up the other part.
All right, it is 8:06. If people have things they really want to say that haven't gotten a chance to say them now or forever hold your peace. Anything? Ian, yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. That's a strong charge. I want to second something that Terry said and something that Brad said, and that may come out in the future. First, I 100% agree that when you tell me that she went over the side of the river with a bottle in her car, I believed you. And for her to show up in the wall later, I was like, this is a second draft, and he forgot to change the cause of death. I didn't think that like there was a ruse, so being clear about that would help me understand that part. But to the larger story, since I don't see Terrence murdering or fantasizing about murdering anybody, it's hard for me to appreciate how I learned anything about chapter 1 and chapter 3 from chapter 2. And I know that Brad mentioned this before and said that like, hopefully that's something that will come clearer later, the connection between those things. But I feel like these are the chapters where that connection really needs to be sealed, because I didn't end chapter 3 with a clear understanding of anything that had happened before it in terms of how it was connected, despite the fact that it was all extraordinarily luminous. Like it was a very intriguing and enrapturing forest to be lost in. It's just that when I step back from it afterward and I say, okay, what are my expectations for chapter 4? I've really come up with nothing. And without an answer to that question, it's hard for me to come forward. So I think since you've got the perspective of your narratorial voice looking back through these things throughout chapter 2, that's really a good opportunity to hammer home what those connections are. You tell us that this is the reason that Terrence becomes this way, but I would like to know more what the way is that he becomes and how it connects to the thing that happens, rather than just saying this explains everything. So those would be my final gun to my head.
You'll live. I'll let you live. And then I guess, yeah, I would agree with that and just say that if this is Terrence trying to convince the next person, of who he is and why he is how he is, then I would wonder what purpose it would serve to be at all kind of vague. And if he wouldn't just be super explicit, like he is. Chapter 2 is just like, this is where I come from. And so to Ian's point and to some of his points, wouldn't he then take that chance to kind of be like, look, and this made me, and then this happened and it made me this way, briefly, to kind of explain himself. Anyways, it is 8:08. I want to let people go. And yeah, is everyone happy? If people can stick around and give more notes, then they feel free to do so. Ray, what are you saying? You just leaving?
I was just going to say thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thank you,
Yes.
Ray. The only
Yes,
thing
thank
I
you, Ray.
wanted to ask is like, what the last question, just it's a yes or no, is like, are you interested to keep reading? Is the question. So Ray, if you just want to give me a thumbs up, or if people just want to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down or anything. Yeah, that works. That's good. All right, smiling faces works.
Ian had like a all right. Unknown. Okay.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night,
night,
Nicole.
Nicole.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
I thought you said we could stay around, Jared.
You can say, yeah, if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, get out of here. I take it back. All right, I'm ending the recording.